The Crystar Junction tore open with violent light as the first wave of Vorath warships emerged, their angular hulls bristling with mass drivers already spinning kinetic death toward the Allied fleet commander. Una Park stood on the bridge of the Defiance, her knuckles white against the command rail as the battle that would decide the fate of the galaxy began. "All ships, open fire," she ordered, and 57 vessels answered with a storm of tungsten and plasma that turned space itself into a killing field. The Vorath vanguard shattered under the combined assault, but more ships poured through the junction to replace them. An endless stream of metal and hatred that showed no sign of stopping. Contact counted 70 and climbing. Lieutenant Chai shouted over the thunder of railgun fire. "They are coming through faster than we anticipated." "Hold formation," Una commanded. "Let them come to us." Human and Concord vessels stood side by side in a defensive crescent, their weapons synchronized by targeting algorithms that Chai's team had spent 11 sleepless nights perfecting Sorith plasma lances superheated enemy hulls while human railguns punched through the weakened armor. Crystalline resonance beams disrupted Vorath targeting systems, while human missiles exploited the momentary blindness to deliver killing blows. It was warfare conducted as a brutal symphony, each species contributing strengths the others lacked, and for the first precious hours, the line held and the Vorath Alpha strike targeted the human carrier Perseverance. Massive, kinetic barrage incoming, Chai warned, his voice cracking with urgency. "They are trying to take out our largest ship." Prism Lord Savak did not hesitate. His crystalline flagship surged forward, interposing itself between the Perseverance and the incoming wall of metal, and his modified resonance shields flared with power as they attempted something no crystalline vessel had ever tried before. The kinetic rounds struck the shields, and instead of passing through, they were deflected. Not all of them. Not enough to save the ship entirely, but enough to reduce the killing blow to a survivable wound as armor plating, installed by Ensign Hana Yoon's team, absorbed the impacts that made it through. Perseverance shuddered and bled atmosphere from a dozen breaches. But she remained in the fight. It worked. Savak transmitted, his crystalline voice ringing with amazement and pain. "Your young engineer's modifications actually worked. Human armor and crystalline shields together. Focus on the battle." Una replied, but pride swelled in her chest as she saw what 3 species could accomplish when they stopped looking down on each other. Hours ground on ships died on both sides. The Defiance took hit after hit, her armor chewing through her reserves of damage control resources. But she remained at the center of the line like a stubborn monument to human endurance. Lieutenant Chai suffered a shrapnel wound to his shoulder, but refused to leave his station, coordinating fleet movements with one hand while a medic worked on the other. Thesic watched from his own damaged bridge as humans bled and burned for species that had mocked them as primitives. "If we survive this," he said to no one in particular, "I will spend the rest of my life teaching my people what humanity showed us today." Then the Vorath flagship emerged from the junction, larger than anything they had seen before, surrounded by an escort of elite warships that immediately began pushing toward the center of the eyed line. "Contact the strike team," Una ordered. "Tell Captain Kang the primary target has arrived." In the cramped interior of a stealth insertion craft, drifting through the chaos of battle, Captain Jizu Kang received the transmission and smiled a wolf smile. "All right, Marines, this is what we train for. Breach positions in 60 seconds. Remember, no shields, no energy weapons, just armor and bullets and the meanest fighting force the galaxy has ever seen. Move!" The insertion craft accelerated through the debris field, too small and too slow for the Vorath to notice among the larger threats demanding their attention, and attached itself to the flagship's hull like a parasitic tick breaching. Charges blew a hole through armor that had never been designed to resist internal assault. 15 human marines poured into the enemy vessel, their rifles barking fire that echoed through corridors where no invader had ever walked. The Vorth were not prepared. They were pilots and gunners and navigators, trained to fight from behind consoles and targeting displays, not to face enemies in the flesh with weapons that spat chemical death at close range. Kang led her team through the chaos, cutting down every defender who tried to stop them, moving with the relentless efficiency of soldiers who had practiced this exact scenario 1,000 times in simulation. Left corridor clear. Right flank secured. Moving to command center 30 meters. Outside, the battle reached its critical point as Vorath reinforcements threatened to overwhelm the Allied fleet's thinning line. The Defiance had lost nearly 40% of her hull integrity, and fires burned in sections that damage control teams could no longer reach. Una felt her ship dying around her, but refused to give the order to withdraw. Just a little longer, she whispered, her eyes fixed on the Vorath flagship. Come on, Jesu, finish it. Inside the enemy vessel, Kang's team reached the command center doors and blew them open with shaped charges that turned reinforced metal into shrapnel. The Hive Admiral stood at the center of a massive neural interface, its insectoid body connected to the swarm's coordination network by cables and implants that made it the living brain of the entire invasion force. It turned to face the intruders with mandibles spread in what might have been surprise or contempt. Khan did not give it time to decide. Her sidearm barked 3 times, each shot punching through chitin and tissue with the simple, brutal efficiency of chemical propellant and lead. The Hive Admiral collapsed. The neural network screamed as its central node went dark. And across the battle space, 200 Vorath ships suddenly lost the coordination that had made them a unified threat. They stopped firing in synchronized volleys. They stopped maneuvering in formation. They began colliding with each other and shooting at empty space and responding to threats that no longer existed. The swarm is fragmenting, Chai reported, his exhausted voice filled with disbelieving joy. They are breaking apart. The flagship's command signal just went dead. All ships, full offensive. Una commanded, and the Allied fleet surged forward into the chaos. What followed was less a battle than a harvest. Vorath ships fell by the dozen as coordinated fire tore through their confused formations, and those that tried to flee found themselves unable to navigate without the Hive Admiral's guidance. By the time the last enemy vessel was destroyed or managed to limp back through the junction, over 150 Vara ships had been reduced to debris. Crystera Prime gleamed in the distance, untouched and safe. In the aftermath, the Allied fleet gathered in orbit around the crystalline homeworld, and Commander Una Park stood on a stage before representatives of every species in the Galactic Concord High. Arbiter Thesok stepped forward and placed the Concord's highest military decoration around her neck, his 4 hands trembling slightly with the weight of the moment. Commander Park, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast assembly hall. On behalf of the Sorvith Dominion, the crystalline hegemony, and every species that owes their survival to human courage, I thank you and your people for saving our civilization. He paused and looked out at the gathered crowd. 3 months ago, I stood in an exhibition hall and laughed at human weapons. I called them primitive and obsolete and embarrassing. I was certain that my species had evolved beyond such crude methods. His voice grew heavy with shame and hard-earned wisdom. I was a fool. We all were. We became so obsessed with elegance and advancement that we forgot what weapons are actually for. They are not meant to be beautiful or impressive or technologically sophisticated. They are meant to protect those you love from those who would do them harm. He turned back to Una. Humans never forgot that lesson. You kept every tool that worked, no matter how crude it seemed, because survival matters more than pride. And when the galaxy needed someone willing to stand in fire and fight with whatever weapons they had, humanity answered. The crowd erupted in applause that shook the walls later, as the celebrations continued. Una stood on the observation deck of the newly repaired Defiance and watched human and alien crews working together to restore damaged systems. Lieutenant Chai joined her. His arm in a sling but his spirits high. "We did it." "Commander, we did," Una agreed. "But this is just the beginning. The Concord is going to need time to rebuild. And they are going to need human help to create a defensive doctrine that accounts for every type of threat. Not just the ones they find aesthetically acceptable." She smiled as a crystalline technician and a human engineer shared a laugh over some private joke. "I think we earned that respect today." "They scoffed at our weapons," Chai said. Echoing words he had spoken weeks ago, Una nodded and looked out at the stars. "They do not scoff anymore." The cargo holds of the human carrier, UE's Perseverance, had been transformed into a sprawling workshop where engineers from 3 species worked side by side in controlled chaos. And Ensign Hana Yoon found herself at the center of one of the most unusual collaborations in galactic history. The mounting brackets will not interface with our resonance conduits, the crystalline technician said, his mineral body chiming with frustration as he examined the human railgun assembly. "Your technology is incompatible with our vessel architecture." Hana wiped grease from her forehead and studied the problem from a different angle. "The brackets do not need to interface with your conduits at all. We can bypass them entirely and create a standalone power supply for the kinetic systems. Your resonance technology keeps your ship running, and our weapons run on their own isolated grid." The technician's crystalline face shifted through several colors that Hana had learned to recognize as confusion, skepticism, and finally reluctant interest. "You would install an entirely separate power system inside our vessel? That seems wasteful." "It is redundant," Hana agreed. "But redundancy means that if one system fails, the other keeps working. Humans build a lot of backup systems because we learned a long time ago that anything can break at the worst possible moment." She gestured toward the armor plating stacked along the far wall of the cargo bay. "Same principle with that. We are not replacing your resonance barriers. We are adding physical protection underneath them. If your shields fail, the armor catches what gets through. If the armor fails, the shields are still there. 2 layers instead of 1. The crystalline technician considered this for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "Your species thinks differently than we do. You do not seek elegance, you seek survival." "We seek both," Hana replied with a small smile. "But when we have to choose, survival wins every time." Across the workshop, similar conversations played out between human engineers and Sorvis shipwrights who had never worked with physical materials heavier than ceremonial robes. Lieutenant Chai supervised a training session where Sorvith officers learned to operate human targeting systems. Their 4-fingered hands struggling with controls designed for human grip until the engineers improvised adaptive interfaces. "The recoil compensation needs to be calibrated for your ship's mass," Chai explained, walking a Sorvith gunnery officer through the process. "Our railguns generate significant kickback when they fire, and if you do not account for it, your aim will drift after every shot." "Recoil," the officer repeated, tasting the unfamiliar word. "You mean the weapon pushes back against the ship when it fires? That is absurdly inefficient." "That is physics," Chai replied patiently. "Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Energy weapons disperse most of their force through heat and radiation, but kinetic weapons throw physical mass at high speed, and that mass pushes back. You cannot cheat Newton." The officer's silver face twisted in something like disbelief. "Your entire species builds military technology around compensating for unavoidable physical limitations. We build our entire civilization around compensating for unavoidable physical limitations. Humans are not the strongest or the fastest or the most durable species in the galaxy, so we learn to use tools and teamwork and stubborn persistence to overcome every obstacle we encounter. He smiled at the alien's bewildered expression. And now we are teaching you to do the same thing. By the time we reach Crystara Prime, your fleet will be ready to fight the way humans fight. In the main conference room of the Perseverance, Commander Unipark met with High Arbiter Thesok and Prism Lord Savak to finalize their battle. Strategy 47 Concord vessels had completed their refitting, equipped with human railgun batteries, missile launchers, and the first armor plating they had carried in millennia combined with the remaining 10 human warships. They had 57 ships to face a Varath armada, estimated at over 200. The odds are not in our favor, Savak observed. His crystalline form dimmed with something that might have been fear. Even with your weapons. We are outnumbered nearly 4-1. Numbers are not everything, Una replied, pulling up a star chart on the central display. The Varath must pass through the Crystara Junction to reach your homeworld. That hyperspace corridor is narrow, only wide enough for perhaps 30 ships to transit at once, and it takes time to complete the passage. She highlighted the junction point with a sweep of her hand. If we position our fleet at the exit point, we can engage them as they emerge. They will not be able to bring their full strength against us because the junction limits how many can arrive at the same time. Thesok studied the tactical overlay with growing understanding. You want to hold the junction like a fortress gate. Force them to come at us in waves we can actually handle instead of overwhelming us with their entire fleet at once. Exactly. And while they waste their numbers against our line, a small strike team will execute a secondary mission. She zoomed the display to show the Varath fleet formation. Intelligence suggests the Varath swarm operates under centralized command. Their Hive Admiral coordinates every ship from the flagship at the center of their formation. If we remove that coordinator, the swarm loses cohesion and fragments into confused individual units. You propose to kill their leader? Savak asked. How? Their flagship will be surrounded by hundreds of escort vessels. Not a ship assault, Una said. A boarding action. While the main fleet holds the junction and keeps the Varath focused on the frontal engagement, a team of human marines will infiltrate through the chaos and physically board the enemy flagship. Both aliens stared at her in stunned silence. Board the flagship. Thesok repeated slowly. You mean leave your ships and enter theirs? With soldiers carrying personal weapons? Fighting hand-to-hand inside enemy corridors? The Varath have never faced close-quarters combat against a prepared enemy. Una explained, their entire military doctrine is built around ship-to-ship engagements and orbital bombardment. They will not expect enemies to come inside their vessels, and even if they did, they would not know how to defend against it. She pulled up profiles of the strike team. Captain Jisoo Kang will lead 15 of our best Marines. They will use a stealth insertion craft to approach during the height of the battle, breach the flagship's hull, and fight their way to the command center. One shot at the Hive Admiral, and the entire swarm collapses. Thesok shook his head in amazement. I watched your exhibition 3 months ago, and thought your species was hopelessly primitive. Now I see that you simply never forgot the lessons we convinced ourselves no longer mattered. He placed all 4 of his hands flat on the table in a gesture of formal commitment. The Sorvith Dominion will stand with you. Commander, we will hold the line at Crystara Junction and trust your Marines to complete their mission. Savak hesitated, his crystalline body flickering with uncertain colors. The hegemony has never allowed foreign warriors to fight in our space, he said slowly. It is a matter of pride and sovereignty that dates back to our founding. He looked at Una with eyes that had seen his world nearly destroyed by enemies. His species could not fight. But pride means nothing if our homeworld burns. I will fight beside you, Commander Park. Tell your boarding team that the hegemony owes them a debt we can never repay." Yuna nodded and turned to address the gathered officers of 3 species. "We launch in 36 hours. Use that time to rest, to check your equipment, and to make peace with whatever powers you believe in. This battle will be the hardest any of us have ever fought." She paused and looked around the room at the faces of aliens who had mocked her people and humans, who had volunteered to die for them. "But we will not fail. We cannot fail, because if we do, there will be no one left to try again." The fleet departed on schedule, 57 vessels bearing weapons the galaxy had laughed at, racing toward a battle that would determine the fate of civilizations. And in the launch bay of the Defiance, Captain Jisoo Kang checked her rifle for the 100th time and waited for the order that would send her into the enemy's heart. The Mars system burned when the human fleet arrived, and Commander Yuna Park studied the tactical display with the focused intensity of a surgeon examining a dying patient Sorvith. Warships tumbled through space in defensive formations that had already begun to collapse, their elegant hulls scarred and punctured by kinetic impacts. They had never been designed to withstand the Var swarm pressed forward in a wall of angular metal, their mass drivers firing in continuous salvos that tore through energy shields like they did not exist. 12 human vessels against that? Lieutenant Chai said quietly, counting the enemy contacts that filled the display with angry red markers. "There must be 60 of them." 63, Yuna corrected. "But we are not fighting alone." She opened a channel to the struggling Sorvith fleet. "This is Commander Yuna Park of the United Earthship Defiance to all Sorvith vessels. Earth's fleet has arrived, and we are assuming tactical coordination of this engagement. All ships will follow my orders exactly and without hesitation." "Acknowledge." Static filled the channel for a moment. Then High Arbiter Thezok's voice came through, strained but recognizable. "Commander Park, I cannot express how grateful we are to see you. My admirals will follow your commands. Please, tell us what to do." Yuna allowed herself a small smile that held no warmth. "First, you are going to stop trying to fight the way you always have. Lieutenant Chai, transmit formation Alpha 7 to all friendly vessels. I want the Sorvith ships pulled back behind our line in support positions." The display shifted as data packets streamed across the void, and Chai began speaking rapidly into his headset, coordinating with the tactical officers aboard each human warship. "Sorvith commanders, your plasma weapons are still effective against Varth hulls. You will provide covering fire while human ships engage at range with kinetic systems. Do not, repeat, do not attempt to close with the enemy. Your shields cannot protect you from their mass drivers, but ours can." "Your shields?" A Sorvith voice asked in confusion. "Human ships have energy barriers?" "Human ships have armor," Yuna replied. "Reinforced hull plating designed to absorb and deflect physical impacts. Something your species apparently forgot how to build. Now form up and follow our lead." The Defiance surged forward with her sister ships, their railguns already tracking targets and calculating firing solutions, all batteries. "Free fire." Yuna ordered. The first salvo erupted from 12 human warships simultaneously, tungsten slugs accelerating the speeds that turned them into devastating kinetic penetrators. And the Varath formation discovered that facing enemies who understood their own technology was very different from slaughtering helpless Concord vessels. 3 Varath ships vanished in the opening seconds, their hulls crumpling under impacts from weapons designed specifically to destroy armored targets. The swarm adjusted its formation and returned fire, mass driver rounds streaking toward the human line. But the Defiance's armor absorbed the hits that would have cored a Sorvith cruiser straight through hull integrity at 92%, Chai reported. "Damage control teams responding to sections 7 and 12. Keep firing," Yuna ordered, "and get me a direct link to the Sorvith flagship." Vesok's image appeared on her secondary display, and she could see the alien arbiter watching his tactical readouts with an expression of dawning comprehension. "Your ships are taking direct hits," he said, "but they are not being destroyed. How is this possible?" "Armor, High Arbiter." Physical barriers made of metal and ceramic composites that do not rely on energy fields to function. When something hits us, the armor takes the damage instead of the crew. It is crude, and it is heavy, and it requires constant maintenance, but it works. She paused as another impact shuddered through the Defiance's frame. It works against kinetic weapons because we designed it to work against kinetic weapons. We never stop preparing for enemies who might fight the way we fight. The battle raged for hours, human railguns trading fire with Vorath mass drivers, while Sorvith plasma lances provided suppressing fire that forced the swarm to keep moving and prevented them from concentrating their assault. Lieutenant Chai coordinated with Sorvith tactical officers, teaching them concepts they had never encountered in their entire military careers. Ballistic trajectories account for relative velocity between launcher and target. He explained over the command channel. You cannot simply point and fire like you do with energy weapons. The projectile takes time to reach its destination, and both you and your target will have moved during that time. "This is absurdly complicated," a Sorvith officer complained. "How do humans fight this way?" "Practice," Chai replied. "Lots of practice. And computer-assisted targeting systems that handle the calculations automatically. Speaking of which, I am transmitting our targeting algorithms now. Install them on your fire control systems, and your plasma accuracy will improve significantly." The Sorvith began adapting, their fire becoming more precise as they learned to work with human tactical doctrine rather than against it. Then the Vorath flagship turned its attention to the SOC's command vessel. Multiple contacts targeting the Sorvith command ship. Chai shouted. "They are trying to decapitate the leadership." Yuna made her decision in less than a second. "Helm, full intercept. Put us between the flagship and those mass drivers." The Defiance lunged forward, her engines screaming as she pushed beyond safe operational limits. And she slid into the path of the incoming fire, just as the Vorath salvos arrived. Impacts slammed into her armored hull like hammer blows from an angry god. Consoles exploded across the bridge. And Yuna grabbed the command rail to keep from being thrown from her feet as the deck heaved beneath her. Hull integrity at 61%. Chai reported, blood running from a cut on his forehead. "We cannot take many more hits like that." "We do not need to take many more," Yuna replied. "We just need to buy time for the Sorvith to fall back and regroup." She opened a channel to Vesok. "High Arbiter, get your ship behind our formation now. We will cover your withdrawal." Vesok stared at her image on his display. Anna's silver face showed something she had never expected to see from him, shame, mixed with something that looked almost like respect. "You are sacrificing your vessel to protect us," he said slowly. "After everything we said about your people, you are putting your ship and your crew between us and death. That is what allies do, High Arbiter. Now move." The Sorvith flagship retreated behind the human line, and the combined fleet reformed around the wounded but still fighting Defiance when the Vorath finally broke off their attack and withdrew to regroup. 37 of their ships had been destroyed compared to 8. Sorvith and 2 human vessels. It was the first victory the Galactic Concord had achieved since the invasion began in the aftermath. Vesok stood in the Defiance's damaged briefing room, surrounded by holographic displays showing the retreating enemy fleet. And he looked at Commander Park with new eyes. "Our intelligence reports indicate the Vorath are massing for a major offensive," Yuna said, her uniform still stained with smoke and her face marked with exhaustion. "They are planning to strike at the crystalline homeworld with a bombardment fleet large Enough to crack the planet's crust. Crystar Prime, Thesok whispered. If they destroy it, the hegemony will collapse, and the Vorath will have access to the largest mineral reserves in known space. They will use those resources to build more ships. Yuna continued. And those ships will carry kinetic weapons to every corner of the galaxy. We stopped them here today, but this war is far from over. She straightened despite her obvious fatigue. We have 11 days before their offensive begins. That is 11 days to retrofit your fleet with human weapons, train your crews in kinetic warfare, and prepare for the largest battle any of us have ever seen. Thesok met her gaze and slowly lowered his head in a gesture that no human had ever received from a Sorvith Arbiter bow of genuine respect. Tell us what you need. Commander, and the Dominion will provide it. Yuna nodded. Then let us get to work. The Grand Exhibition Hall of Vareth Prime stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian floors and crystalline walls that hummed with ancient power. And every major species of the Galactic Concord had gathered to witness humanity's first official military presentation since their acceptance into the Alliance 50 years ago. Commander Yuna Park stood at the center of the human delegation's platform, her dress uniform crisp and her posture straight as she watched the alien representatives take their seats in the towering amphitheater that surrounded them. They look eager to laugh at us. Lieutenant Do-Hwan Chai muttered from his position beside her, his dark eyes scanning the crowd of hundreds of alien dignitaries. Let them look, Yuna replied quietly, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. The Sorvith Dominion occupied the highest tier, their tall silver-skinned forms draped in flowing robes that shimmered with embedded holographic displays showing their military achievements. And High Arbiter Thesok sat at their center with an expression that could only be described as amused condescension to the left. The crystalline hegemony delegation sparkled under the exhibition lights, their bodies composed of living mineral structures that refracted light into rainbow patterns. And Prism Lord Savak watched the human platform with something between curiosity and pity. Honored members of the Galactic Concord, Yuna began, her voice amplified across the vast space. Humanity is grateful for the opportunity to present our military capabilities and to demonstrate our readiness to serve as full partners in the defense of galactic peace. She activated the display behind her, and holographic images of human warships appeared in the air above the platform, their angular hulls and protruding weapons arrays looking decidedly utilitarian compared to the elegant curves of Concord vessels. The backbone of Earth's defense fleet consists of the Defender-class cruisers, armed with magnetic acceleration cannons capable of launching tungsten projectiles at velocities exceeding 15 kilometers per second. A ripple of whispers passed through the alien audience, and Yuna could see several delegates leaning toward each other with expressions she recognized all too well. Additionally, she continued, our ships carry arsenals of guided missiles, utilizing chemical propulsion and conventional explosive warheads, along with close-range rotary cannons for point defense against incoming threats. The whispers grew louder, and then High Arbiter Thesok rose from his seat with a smile that made Yuna's jaw tighten. Forgive my interruption. Commander Park, Thesok said, his melodic voice carrying easily across the hall. But I must ask for clarification to ensure the translation systems are functioning correctly. Of course. High Arbiter. Thesok spread his forearms in a gesture of theatrical confusion that drew chuckles from nearby delegates. You are describing kinetic weapons, are you not? Projectiles propelled by chemical reactions and magnetic forces? Physical objects thrown at targets? That is correct, Yuna answered, keeping her voice level. And explosive warheads? Compounds that release energy through rapid chemical decomposition? Yes, High Arbiter. Thesok turned to face the audience, and his smile widened into something approaching genuine delight. My friends, this is truly remarkable. The humans have brought to this grand exhibition the very same weapons our ancestors used before we discovered fire. I had heard rumors that humanity was technologically disadvantaged, but I never imagined they would confirm it so enthusiastically. Laughter erupted across the amphitheater, and Una felt heat rising to her cheeks as hundreds of alien voices joined in the mockery. Prism Lord Savak stood and added his own crystalline voice to the commentary. In the hegemony, we display such weapons in museums as curiosities from our primitive past. Does Earth truly expect to defend itself with thrown rocks and burning chemicals? Perhaps they should focus their efforts on agriculture or entertainment, where such limited technology might prove less embarrassing. The laughter intensified, and Lieutenant Chai's hands curled into fists at his sides. "Commander," he whispered through clenched teeth, "we do not have to accept this." "Yes, we do," Una replied without moving her lips. For now, Dezok raised his hands to quiet the crowd, though amusement still danced in his silver eyes. "I mean no offense to our human friends," he said with exaggerated sincerity, "and I am certain their primitive weapons serve them adequately against whatever minor threats exist in their small corner of space. But the Galactic Concord has moved beyond such crude methods. Our plasma lances, graviton cannons, and phase disruptors make physical projectiles obsolete. Our energy shields can disperse any beam weapon known to exist. Why would we ever return to throwing metal at each other like animals?" He turned back to Una with a patronizing tilt of his head. "Perhaps, Commander, humanity should observe our presentations today and learn what true military technology looks like. In a few thousand years, your species may evolve sufficiently to join us at this level." The delegation endured 3 more hours of presentations from species whose weapon systems operated on principles that made human physicists weep with envy. And throughout it all, Una watched and listened and said nothing while Chai recorded everything their sensors could capture on the transport back to the human fleet orbiting Verith Prime. The lieutenant finally broke his silence. "Their shields," he said, pulling up the data on his tablet. "Did you notice the calibration?" "I noticed," Una replied, staring out the viewport at the distant stars. "They are designed exclusively for energy dispersion. Plasma, lasers, particle beams, graviton pulses, all of it. But kinetic impacts? Mass driver rounds? Explosive ordnance? Their shields would barely slow them down." Una nodded slowly, a cold calculation forming behind her eyes. They abandoned kinetic weapons so long ago that they forgot anyone might still use them. It is a massive vulnerability. If any hostile force attacked with projectile weapons, the Concord's entire defensive doctrine would be worthless. Which is precisely why we are going to request an audience with United Earth Command, Una said, turning away from the viewport to face her officer. And precisely why we are going to keep this observation to ourselves for now. Chai frowned in confusion. Should we not warn them? Would they listen? You heard Desok. We are primitives to them, children playing with sticks and stones. If we tell them their shields have a critical weakness, they will laugh and ignore us, just as they laughed at our weapons today. She pulled up her own display and began composing a priority. Message to Earth. No. Lieutenant, we will document everything we learned here, and we will prepare our own forces for the day when someone proves us right. Because that day is coming, whether the Concord believes it or not. 3 months later, that day arrived. The first reports came from the Sorvith border world of Kethan, where long-range sensors detected an unidentified fleet emerging from unexplored space beyond the galactic rim. And the readings made no sense to Concord analysts who had never encountered such primitive signatures. The Varth swarm had no energy weapons. They carried mass drivers that hurled asteroids at relativistic speeds. They launched missiles packed with explosive compounds that Concord scientists had not seen in millennia. They attacked with the oldest weapons in the universe, and the Sorvith defensive fleet discovered too late that their elegant energy shields offered no protection against simple rocks thrown very fast within hours. The border stations fell within days, the colonies burned, and across the galaxy, Commander Unipark received an emergency transmission from High Arbiter Desok himself, his silver face pale with terror as he spoke words that humanity had waited 50 years to hear. "We need your help." High Arbiter Desok stood on the observation deck of the Sorvith command station orbiting Kethan, and for the first time in his 3 centuries of life, he watched his people die in numbers too large to comprehend. The Var swarm filled the space before him like a plague of metal locusts, their ships ugly and angular and covered in welded plates of raw iron that should have made them laughable compared to the graceful curves of Sorvith warcraft. But no one was laughing now. Concentrate fire on the lead vessels. Admiral Morath commanded from the tactical center below, his voice cracking with desperation as another Sorvith cruiser vanished in a ball of expanding debris. Plasma lances struck true, their brilliant beams of superheated matter splashing across Varath hulls and scorching metal plating into vapor. But the enemy ships simply kept coming. They had no shields to overwhelm. They had no energy systems to overload. They were just metal and thrust, and an endless hunger for destruction. And when their mass drivers fired, the Sorvith shields might as well have been made of paper. Thesok watched a kinetic round the size of a ground transport punch through the flagship's barrier without slowing, and the vessel that had served the Dominion for 200 years crumpled like foil around the impact point before exploding from within. "The shields are useless," someone screamed across the command channel. "Their weapons pass right through. What kind of barbarian technology is this?" "The same kind humanity tried to show us 3 months ago," Desok thought, and the realization tasted like ash in his mouth. The battle lasted 6 more hours by the end. 17 Sorvith warships had been reduced to drifting wreckage, and the Vara swarm descended upon Kethan's surface with landing craft that vomited soldiers armed with chemical firearms and explosive grenades. The colony's ground defenses had been designed to counter plasma infantry and phase-shifted assault troops. They had no answer for bullets. Within a week, 2 more Sorvith worlds had fallen, and the crystalline hegemony reported that Varath raiders had struck their border territories with equal devastation. Prison Lord Sivok's emergency transmission to the Concord Council chamber showed his crystalline face fractured with stress lines that had not existed before the invasion began. "There. Missiles shatter our resonance barriers," he reported, his voice trembling with harmonics of barely controlled panic. "We cannot adapt our defenses quickly enough. Our weapons damage their ships, but they simply absorb the losses and keep attacking. We have not faced such a threat in 10,000 years." Desok listened to the reports from his seat in the council chamber, surrounded by representatives from dozens of species who had spent centuries congratulating themselves on their technological superiority. Now they sat in stunned silence as their empire began to burn. "We must find a solution," the Vrethian ambassador said, her tentacles writhing with agitation. "Our scientists are working to develop countermeasures, but the manufacturing base for kinetic weapon systems was dismantled generations ago. We cannot simply rebuild from nothing." "How long would it take?" Desok asked, already knowing he would not like the answer. "To design, test, manufacture, and deploy kinetic weapons and armor systems across our combined fleets?" The Vrethian paused, her bioluminescent patterns flickering with calculation. 40 years at minimum, and that assumes unlimited resources and no further Varath advancement. "We do not have 40 years. Sivok snapped, his crystal body ringing with discordant tones. "We may not have 40 days. The swarm grows larger with each world they consume, and our defensive lines are collapsing across every front. Thesok closed his eyes and felt the weight of what he was about to do settle onto his shoulders. Like a physical burden, he thought of the exhibition hall on Vareth Prime. He thought of his own mocking laughter. He thought of Commander Unipark's steady voice and unbreaking composure as hundreds of aliens treated her people like primitive fools. There is one species that still manufactures kinetic weapons, he said quietly, and every head in the chamber turned toward him. The Vrethian ambassador's tentacles went still. You cannot be serious. I am entirely serious. The humans never abandoned projectile technology. They still build mass drivers and missile systems and explosive ordnances. They still armor their ships with physical plating instead of relying solely on energy barriers. But they are primitives. Another delegate protested. Their weapons are toys compared to our. Their weapons are exactly what the Vareth are using against us. Thesok roared, rising from his seat with all four arms spread wide. The only difference is that humanity designed their systems to work alongside energy weapons rather than instead of them. They maintained dual capabilities while we abandoned an entire category of warfare because we thought ourselves too advanced for such crude methods. The chamber fell silent. Thesok lowered his arms and took a long breath before continuing. I am going to request human assistance. I am going to broadcast that request across the entire Concord network so that every species can see what our arrogance has cost us. And I am going to pray that humanity is more merciful than we deserve. The transmission to Earth went out within the Hor. Thesok wrote it himself, choosing each word with careful attention to both urgency and humility, though the latter did not come easily to him, to the United Earth Command and the people of humanity. I am High Arbiter Thesok of the Sorvith Dominion. 3 months ago, I stood in the exhibition hall of Vareth Prime and mocked your military capabilities. I called your weapons primitive and your technology embarrassing. I suggested that your species should focus on lesser pursuits and leave warfare to your betters. He paused, and when he continued, his voice carried the weight of genuine shame. I was wrong. The Galactic Concord faces an enemy we cannot defeat because we forgot what you never forgot. We abandoned kinetic weapons so completely that we have no defense against them. And now the Vara swarm burns our worlds with the very technology we dismissed as obsolete. I'm asking, no, I am begging for your help. Please. On Earth, the United Defense Council gathered in emergency session to watch the transmission. And the debate that followed was bitter and divided. They laughed at us, Admiral Soenhong said, her weathered face hard with old anger. They called us primitives and children and suggested we should know our place. Now they expect us to save them? They expect us to show them what humanity is really made of, Admiral Minjae Kwon countered, his calm voice cutting through the rising tension. And they are right to expect it, because that is exactly what we are going to do. He pulled up the tactical displays showing Vareth advancement across Concord space. This swarm will not stop with the Sorvith or the hegemony. If they consume the Concord, they will come for Earth next, and they will come with fleets built from the resources of 100 conquered worlds. We can fight them now with allies, or we can fight them later alone. And if we save the Concord? Hong asked, what then? Do they go back to treating us like backward animals? No, Commander Unipark said, stepping forward from her position near the door, because we are going to make sure they never forget what we did for them. This is our chance to prove that humanity belongs at the table, not as charity cases or curiosities, but as equals. Maybe even as leaders. The vote passed by a narrow margin within 6 hours. Earth's orbital shipyards began loading ammunition and preparing vessels for the longest deployment. In human history, Commander Park stood on the bridge of the used Defiance and watched her. Flotilla of 12 warships form up around her, their hulls bristling with the weapons the galaxy had laughed at. "Set course for Sorith space," she ordered. "Maximum sustainable speed, Lieutenant." Chai entered the coordinates and looked back at her with something between determination and grim satisfaction. "They scoffed at our weapons." "Commander." "Yes, they did," Una replied, her eyes fixed on the stars ahead. "Let us show them what those weapons can do."